Hi, I'm Dave, and this is Dave's Worldview. Hey, before I start, I want to explain very briefly why I do what I do. Um, Presently we are engaged in a war of words. Some have called it a voice war, and leftists know that they can win this war if they can intimidate us into silence. And that is why the less than 25% of people on the far left call the other 75% of Americans transphobes, xenophobes, homophobes, misogynists, racists, and other nasty names. It's also why they try to cancel people that oppose their ideologies by trying to shut down their businesses or get them fired from their jobs. Many of them wish they could send us to re-education camps like they do in the communist countries that they try to emulate. But thankfully, that is not acceptable, at least not yet. But for too long, many have been silent while this war of words has been waged for the hearts and minds of our children. And radical leftists have spoken the culture we live in today into existence by the words of their mouths. How else can you explain the dystopian nightmare that they have created? Our children are the most privileged children on the planet, but leftists have confused and convinced them by their words that the United States is not the land of the free and the home of the brave, but we are the land of the oppressed and the persecuted, and that bravery is outdated and overrated. The results speak for themselves. The rates of suicide, the ultimate act of despair, has continued to climb the woker and more liberal that our society has become. Many of our fellow citizens, including children, are on antidepressant and anti-anxiety medications. We must speak the truth in order to save our children and their futures. So today I want to talk to you about school boards, teachers, and parents. I want to start by saying that this is not a subject that I latched onto in the last year because of critical theory or any other issue. What has been happening in our public schools, especially in the most liberal areas of our country, has been a huge concern of mine for many years. As far back as 5 or 6 years ago, I went to a meet and greet for a man running to be a representative for the South Dakota State Legislature. And after discussing various threats that we face as a nation, I told him that legislation to approve school vouchers was my number one concern. I realized then that the number one domestic long-term existential threat we face as a nation is the indoctrination of our children. This indoctrination started decades ago in our colleges and universities, but now is also firmly entrenched in our public schools. In the first video I ever did in November 2018 titled Globalist versus Patriot, I made the case that global Marxists were trying to take over America. And in my second video, Let's Stop Identity Politics, I explained how the leftist elites and the media they control were using identity politics to divide and conquer Americans. And then in September 2020, long before critical theory became a hot topic at school boards, I explained in my video, Exposing Critical Theory and Identity Politics, how what many of us called identity politics for many years was actually an ideology called critical theory. An ideology that Marxist educators were using to brainwash our children. The question is, why would the leftist elites want to indoctrinate and brainwash our children? Put simply, they are global Marxists willing to use anarchy, chaos, and the resulting fear propagated through the mainstream media to gain the control that allows them to manipulate the masses. Why? Why does any madman or evil empire want to dominate and control the world? I would answer from 1 John 2:16. It talks about the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Or put another way, basically power and greed. Which brings me back to school boards, teachers, and parents in my recent address to my local school board. This is what I wanted to say in its entirety, but due to time constraints, I was forced to edit some material. Okay, I said to the school board members, I want to say that you're one of the last lines of defense that we as parents have against the anti-American, anti-family agenda of what used to be the Democratic Party. And that includes the rhinos too, the Republicans in name only, the globalists, all the global elites. Many appreciate the incredible pressures you have placed yourself under in standing against the Marxism that masquerades as progressivism. Please continue to be vigilant because the tactics and terminology of the left will continue to morph in an attempt to hide their true intentions. And then I said, thank you for your sacrifices to the school board members. To the teachers, that oppose the indoctrination of students, I want to say that it is time to make a stand for your students and your nation. It is no secret that the NEA, the American Federation of Teachers, and their affiliates are controlled by the Marxist wing of the Democratic Party. Allowing one political party to use teachers' unions to indoctrinate children is unacceptable. Identity politics, critical theory, and gender-confusing students is meant to divide a nation. It is time to say no. Teachers opposed to indoctrinating students must push back by condemning and defunding leftist-controlled teachers' unions and forming alternative unions that prioritize education over indoctrination. And you know what? I just happened to hear yesterday Biden, he's kind of sucking up to unions, but he mentioned how his wife was a proud member of the NEA. You know what? I'm sorry, but if you're a member of the NEA, if you know what they really stand for, it's no better than being a member of the Communist Party of China or North Korea or Russia. I mean, the NEA is a corrupt, sick, disgusting organization. Look at what their leaders stand for. You can't tell me you're just a member because they protect you or they do anything for you. I mean, I wouldn't belong to the Aryan Brotherhood just because they protected my home from whatever, any kind of threat. I mean, you got to condemn what needs to be condemned. Anyhow, that's to the teachers. Okay, and I know there's good teachers out there, and I know there's a lot of teachers that oppose the NEA and the other unions. You need to step up. You need to stand up for your kids. Anyhow, the parents, I want to say that removing Marxist indoctrination from public schools will take time. If possible, you should remove your children from public schools and find an alternative that works for your family and your budget. We must demand that our state legislatures pass laws allowing our tax money to follow our students. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, in 2017, approximately $14,100 was spent per student for public school education. Many parents could afford private schools, and other parents could afford to stay home and homeschool if some of those funds were reappropriated. No one should be forced to fund and send their kids to public schools that are indoctrination centers for Marxism. Now, even if you as a parent can find a way to remove your children from the public school system, this is no time to disengage from the battle for the minds of our children. If the public schools are allowed to indoctrinate the vast majority of students into embracing socialism and communism, the future of our nation and that of our children and grandchildren will be bleak. So you still need to be engaged. Even if you can get your kids out of public schools, you still need to show up to the school board meetings. You still need to keep pushing for the public schools to be cleaned up. Many people are now waking up to the fact that this is not a Democrats versus Republican issue. This is a Democrats and Republicans in name only, or rhinos, globalists versus America issue. Not just America, but this fight's going on all over the world. You can see it in Australia, you can see it in Canada, you can see it in Europe. Communist dictator Joseph Stalin, who by various estimates was responsible for around 20 million non-combatant deaths, had this to say about education. Education is a weapon whose effect depends on who holds it in his hands and at whom it is aimed. Now, today's Democratic Marxist Party and the rhinos that support them understand Stalin's thinking well, and they're using leftist educators to aim the weapon of education, or more precisely, the weapon of indoctrination at our children. We must stand between these leftists and their intended victims. How do we do this? By speaking the truth. If you read the account of creation in Genesis, you will see a pattern that God spoke everything into existence. We are created in God's image, and because of that, we also share in the ability to create things by the words of our mouths. For example, I can create a great marriage and a great family by the words of my mouth. The same is true with all of our relationships. Unfortunately, the opposite is also true. The Bible calls Satan a liar and a deceiver. He uses people and their words to spread his lies, creating confusion, anger, and division. We must use our words to speak the truth, thereby dispelling his lies and creating certainty, joy, and unity. We must tell our children that they are created in God's image. We must tell our children that God created them male and female, and that even the science that the left tries to hide behind affirms only two genders. And we must tell our children that America is good. You know what? This country has made mistakes, but you know what? I guarantee you there was a whole lot of Americans that were opposed to what happened to the Native Americans. There was a lot of Americans that were opposed to slavery. There have been a lot of Americans opposed to a lot of the bad things that have been done by this country, by our government. And there's a lot of Americans that are opposed to a government today that would kill 60 million babies, babies even old enough to live outside the womb. Someday we're going to look back and we're going to say, oh my God, this time, these people were barbarians killing babies like this and allowing teenagers to have their breasts removed and their sexual organs disfigured or removed. I mean, what is going on now is just as evil as slavery, just as evil, more evil than slavery, more evil than what happened with the native people, because it's happening to all of us. And so, you know, America is good. Our government isn't always good. We're in that situation right now. We have an evil government. Evil things are being done. We need to speak the truth. We need to stand up against evil. Got a president who left Americans behind in Afghanistan. We don't even know how many, hundreds, thousands, we don't know. Who would have ever believed we would have a president that would do something like that? Anyhow, it's time to speak up. It's time to speak the truth. We'll either speak up now or we will live in tyranny and under an authoritarian government for decades, maybe centuries. So thanks for watching Dave's Worldview. And be bold, be courageous, pray for bold and courageous people, because that's what we need the days in which we live. Thank you.